Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 7 on Elizabethan England. Now, in the previous video we were looking at the challenge that the Puritans posed for Elizabeth when she was trying to put her religious settlement into place. And we had a good look at that in video number 6. Go back and have a look if you've forgotten or you want to make some extra notes. Today we're looking at video 7 on the other side. What challenge did the Catholics pose for Elizabeth trying to put her religious settlement into place? Now, if you remember her religious settlement, Elizabeth was trying to find the middle way, not to one side, the Puritans, not to the other side, the Catholics. She wanted the middle way, compromise. Now, can you remember any of the compromises that she made for the Catholics? I'll give you a second or two. Well, give yourself bonus marks if you said, well, she called herself Supreme Governor of the Church rather than Supreme Head, because for the head, for the Catholics, that would be the Pope. Also, she allowed some form of decorations, stained glass, music, the vestments. Here's me in my brighter top. Remember, for the Puritan, I wore a very dark top. The vestment for the Catholics would be brighter, and Elizabeth allowed that. So she did make concessions to the Catholics. Because, remember, the middle way, she wanted to avoid rebellion. She wanted to avoid trouble. Did it work? Well, the Puritans didn't rebel. What about the Catholics? Well, at first, yes, it did work. The majority of the Catholic clergy, the priests, they did sign the Act of Supremacy. They swore loyalty to Elizabeth. So therefore, they would carry on in their church. So therefore, the Catholic congregation, who still went to the same church, said, well, we've still got the same priest. This is okay. We will carry on as usual. So you could argue that it worked. Concessions, compromise worked. But, there's always a but, ladies and gentlemen. A threat still remained. The Catholics did provide a threat to Elizabeth, especially in the north and the northwest of the country. Rich, powerful nobles, for example, Westmoreland and Northumberland. Now, they're a little bit annoyed because obviously they've lost a bit of political power. Elizabeth was Protestant. A lot of the Protestants were promoted. So politically, they're not very pleased. They didn't like these new, powerful Protestant nobles. For example, Robert Dudley. They also did not like, in the Privy Council, people who weren't nobles. For example, William Cecil. So there was potential political problems there. And of course, some Catholics did have religious problems with Elizabeth. They're saying, yes, you've made concessions, fair enough, but you are still a Protestant. And for them, that was a problem. Now, one thing that really upset them was that the new religious service, the Mass, was in English. Previously, the Catholics had always had it in Latin. Now, some Catholic teachings were saying, if we're not having the Latin Mass, well, then we can't go to heaven when we die. So it was important to them. Some Catholics refused to attend Elizabeth's church. Remember, they were supposed to go every single Sunday. And they refused. Now, what was the punishment for that? Can you remember? Yes, they would be fined. The people who refused were known as recusants, and they had to pay the recusancy fine. Now, it was £1. Quite a lot if you were poor, not very much if you were a rich, powerful noble. But they're refusing to go to the service, so they are showing opposition. Now remember, Elizabeth ordered people not to be too keen to sort of go and chase them down. In other words, oh, turn a blind eye. We won't enforce it too much. Also, some Catholics had secret masses in their own house. Some Catholic priests arrived from the continent called Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, Jesuit priests, and they took these secret masses. So there is a potential problem there for going against what Elizabeth said. Now, if you remember in the Puritans, I said the Puritans really in the end weren't much of a threat because they didn't want to join forces with France, Spain, and most of all the Pope. Well, the Catholics in England might want to join with all these three. There could be a foreign threat supporting Catholic opposition in England. So there is potential for problems. Now, at first, that threat was reduced. France, if you remember, had lost contact a little bit with Scotland. So the threat from the north had been reduced. Scotland had become Protestant. We'll deal more with that in the next video. So France then, 1562, started to have its own problems at home. The Catholics against their Protestants, called the Huguenots, and a civil war broke out in France. So therefore France has to deal with that rather than maybe look abroad and try and sort problems out and interfere in England. So the threat from France was reducing for Elizabeth. Secondly, Spain. Now, Spain was a very, very powerful country. At first, Spain didn't want to replace Elizabeth with Mary Queen of Scots, a Catholic, because Mary Queen of Scots was closely linked to France, and Spain and France had been enemies. So therefore, Spain wouldn't want to make France even stronger. Secondly, Spain didn't really want to upset Elizabeth too much in case Elizabeth said, well, look at Spain, they're a Catholic country, they're threatening England. What I'll do is I will now decide to help the Netherlands, another Protestant country which was being threatened by Spain. So at the start, both France and Spain aren't really that interested in supporting the Catholics in England, so therefore opposition and the potential threat from the Catholics was slightly reduced. What about the Pope? Now, the papacy, the Pope, at the time when Elizabeth became Queen, it was Pope Pius IV. Now, people expected that he would issue an excommunication. Now, that's a posh word, but basically it means kicking Elizabeth out of the Catholic Church and say, right, I'm excommunicating you. Now, if the Pope had done that, then all the English Catholics, according to religious law, would have been entitled to say, well, you've been excommunicated by our leader, the Pope. We do not have to do anything you say. So that could have been a problem for Elizabeth. But at first, the Pope did not excommunicate Elizabeth. Why not? Any ideas? Well, number one, he actually didn't have that much power himself. He lacked military support to go against Elizabeth. Number two, if you remember, Elizabeth kept the cross, the crucifix, in her own private chapel. Well, news of this got back to Pope Pius, and he thought, maybe Elizabeth will change. She still kept almost like the Catholic crucifix. Maybe she'll change, so I won't go totally against her. I will hope she will come back. So that's why the Pope didn't actually excommunicate Elizabeth. So the Catholics are there as a potential threat. The foreign threat is there, France, Spain and the Pope, but it is reducing, it is declining. So at first, 1559 is the religious settlements. As we go through the 1560s, yes, there was a threat, but again, it was limited. However, and this is important, ladies and gentlemen, however, things had the potential to change. the threat could easily become more severe. Now, what could change? Well, let's have a look. Relations with Spain could change. If relations between England and Spain got worse, particularly, for example, over the Netherlands, well, then maybe Spain might say, aha, right, let's get involved now. Let's try and get the Catholics to cause problems at home for Elizabeth. So that's one. Mary, Queen of Scots. Now then, Mary, Queen of Scots. The Queen of Scotland. But there is a link there with England. If Mary, Queen of Scots, all of a sudden, if that situation begins to change, that could cause problems. Mary, Queen of Scots was a Catholic. She was also heir to the throne because Elizabeth is not married and Elizabeth has not got any children. Mary, Queen of Scots was Elizabeth's second cousin. So she was heir to the throne of England, a Catholic. There's potential for trouble there. So we've got relations with Spain might get worse. Mary, Queen of Scots, the situation there is potentially a troubled one for Elizabeth. What if the Catholics start to get involved in plots to overthrow Elizabeth? Would that change the situation? What if these Jesuit priests who are arriving in England, what if they are encouraging more and more secret masses? Would that change the situation? Now, all of those things did actually happen. Relations with Spain got worse. It's coming in a video soon. Mary, Queen of Scots, that whole situation completely changed. It's the next video. The Jesuits were coming to England more and more secret masses were taking place. And the Catholics did begin to plot to overthrow Elizabeth. So the threat was beginning. At first, it was there, but almost reduced, limited. But there was a serious threat. And as we moved into the 1570s, the threat from the Catholics actually rises. And we'll look at that in future videos. Now remember, Elizabeth did not like to persecute people for their religious beliefs. The middle way. Mary, her stepsister, she executed 300. But if the threat is increasing from the Catholics, surely Elizabeth will have to act. Surely she'll have to do something. I wonder what. So there we see the threat from the Catholics. Let's just compare it to the Puritans. The Puritan threat was there. They were unhappy with Elizabeth's concessions to the Catholics, but they never ever really pushed it. Mary, Queen of Scots was Catholic. They wouldn't want her to replace Elizabeth. France was Catholic. Spain was Catholic. They didn't like the Pope. So all the possible people there, the Puritans would have nothing to do with. The Puritans were also divided, so they were a limited threat. The Catholics at first were limited, but there was potential for it to erupt, and the threat and the problem, the challenge to increase. Very, very different. Puritans, Catholics. What questions might they ask you? Well, they might say, give 2 features of the Catholic challenge. You could use stuff from this video to help you. Or explain why the Catholic threat was more important than the Puritan threat. Comparing the two and giving your reasons. Or they might say, explain why the Catholic threat to Elizabeth increased after 1566, 1567, 1568. In other words, why was the threat in the 1570s from the Catholics greater than the threat in the 1560s? And again, you can use information from this video. But we need to look at what's coming next. Now, I mentioned one key person, Mary, Queen of Scots. Wow. The next video I will concentrate on explaining the key points of Mary Queen of Scots, because her situation changes, and then that changes the nature of the threat from the Catholics. And all of a sudden, Elizabeth is faced with a really, really severe challenge. That's coming soon. Hope, as ever, it's been useful. All the best now. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.